Thanks very much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know that this year's ITB Berlin Convention has the Travel 4.0 digitization of the travel industry as its main focus. And that is a subject for which we now have arranged 105 different events, which of course highlight lots of different aspects. But one of the aspects has so far not been mentioned much, and that concerns staff competence, mindset, training, the culture that exists in companies. And the staff is really important if you wish to digitally transform your company. I'm very glad that we have with us Georgia Stegmann. Ms. Stegmann is a member of the Global Digital Transformation Practice. I think the name says it all. And she's just told me that she's been with Russell Reynolds Associates for 5 years now. So that is definitely a subject with which she's been quite familiar for a number of years. Before we start our little discussion, or rather our interview, as it is officially called, I would like to ask you all to use our real-time voting system in order to get your views on digital transformation, digital leadership, and so on. So the first question for our real-time voting is, with digital transformation in the tourism sector, can you sort the digital transformation with the existing human resources? Answer 1, you can do that very well. Answer number 2, you can succeed, but it does require some staff adjustment. Or number 3, no, you will not succeed doing it with your existing staff. You can only choose once, so please vote either 1, 2, or 3. So, and here we have the result. Ms. Stegmann, you will find it quite difficult to see, so I'll tell it. 5% responded by saying the digital transformation can be successful, very successful with existing staff. But a larger number of people said no, 25%, it will not succeed. And the great majority, that 69%, says yes, it will succeed doing it with existing staff, but it requires quite a bit of adjustment. So that's a very interesting feedback. And thank you for that, ladies and gentlemen. It goes in line with what I read in FAZ, that's Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. They wrote about CeBIT, which is going to open next week, and said there were 43,000 situations vacant, all these vacancies in the IT sectors for which it's been proving incredibly difficult to find people. And they're saying the digital transformation is both the greatest challenge but also the greatest opportunity in recent decades. I think that's good for us to start with. Well, Ms. Stegmann, we, of course, are in the travel business, and I think most of you will not know Russell Reynolds. So my first question to you, could you please explain to us what it is that Russell Reynolds Associates are doing? Well, Russell Reynolds Associates has been around for 47 years. The company deals primarily with finding executives, leadership staff, selecting talent, recruiting specialists. And as I've said to you, we've been looking into the digital transformation issue quite some years ago already. We have focused not just on selecting the right executives, we also consult board members, supervisory and management board members. As part of leadership and succession assessments, we provide advice. We try to identify the right people. We try to learn what are the competencies which exist in a company, what are the skills that they need, and what is it that is available which is compatible with the company. Will the skills and the potential of the company be enough or not? And if it's not enough, then we need to supplement them. If we want to do that from outside, what do we use to do it? And if you have identified internal talent, how can you make sure that this talent gets promoted sufficiently well? Now, it's quite new that in the United States we've set up a Center of Leadership Insights, quote unquote. What that means is we would like to go into the managers and the managerial level in general in the United States and help them to sort all the leadership issues better and have a better approach to that. So human capital, human resources, that's really the issue. How can people be selected properly, used properly within the company, promote it within the company, and develop? That's one of our focal areas. And that is the reason why we've invited you, and that's why we're so happy you have accepted. There's a very specific reason as well for inviting you. Reynolds have done a very exciting study, a survey where 28 global digital transformation leaders have been selected, companies that are really well known to be ace at digitalization. And you compare the competence level and profile of these people with 5,000 people from the analog world. And this comparison has yielded some interesting insights. Now, can you tell us about the highlights? As I told you earlier, we've looked into the impact of digitization something like 5 years ago. We looked at what are the technology drivers, how does that impact organizational structures and leadership. And that is why we said 5 years ago that is definitely a subject which is worthy of more intensive attention. So the idea came from the United States, the colleagues of mine that are in Silicon Valley, and they've noticed that there's a very different sort of leadership elite, a whole leadership culture that is emerging there is different, and we should study that. And then we saw what is it that makes the entrepreneur in the valley, and what are different to the other managers. So what's the different in sort of managerial skills or leadership? And as a next step, we looked at, well, are there chief digital transformation officers, if you like, or transformation officers, whatever you wish to call it. There are different ways of calling that. But how do they differentiate? Are there things they have in common? And if not, what sets them apart from each other? The whole thing came out of the fact that there are some very major companies where change and transformation has really worked. But the people, the sort of species that drove this transformation tends not to be the traditional strategist, controller, lawyer, but you found different people in these companies that were responsible for at least flanking the transformation, if not driving it. And the initiation of change meant that these people first stay in the company for the transformation, but often move on afterwards. And there were lots of insights we gained, which we then clustered. And we used interviews, psychometric processes, and others. So we looked at what exactly are the traits that make these people. And that's why we conducted the study you mentioned. I would like to quote, you say there are 5 characteristics that have been identified as outstanding in these digital transformation leaders. Joy of innovation, dealing with disruptions. Second, degree of social adaptability. Third, leadership strength. And fourth, willingness to drive for goals and objectives. Could you explain what exactly that means? I think the big heading under which we can summarize all these change agents, as I call it, the things that drive change, is that the people concerned manage to show up a sort of vision of the future that really woke up the existing management. They should all be awake already, but if you look into companies, you notice that people are more interested in keeping alive and maintaining what they have than embracing change. So, in the maintenance of what they've got, achieve the status quo, if you like, is often positive, but the people who drive transformation have joy in innovation, as I said it, and the way they drive innovation and enjoy that has a lot to do with the fact that they are more creative. They're more curious. They're, if you like, more hungry and have a very different approach and they're a great thirst for knowledge. And it is that thirst for knowledge which they love to hand on to other people. So when it comes to innovation, they are much more innovative than other people. I always say it's the difference between the digital and the analog world, or the still analog world, if you like. It probably isn't exactly surprising if we say that these people are also much more into discussing matters with others. In other words, the way they think is more geared towards critically questioning what is going on. They say, who are my competitors today? But who will also, it's another question, who will be my competitor tomorrow? And will that still be a competitor in the same industry or segment? And will it be the same competitors I've been dealing with, or will there be somebody completely different? Best example, which we all know about, is the automotive sector. In the automotive sector, people are suddenly thinking, how can we as an industry find answers to Apple, Google, and so on? These are all companies that also look into the car of the future. And they suddenly make it important for the industry to look into these issues as well. And that's part of what I call the discursive force that these people have, which is much more widespread than in the traditional entrepreneur. We were a bit surprised by something else, which we hadn't expected, at least not to the scale that we did see. And that concerns the fact that these transformers, if you like, the people who drive digital transformation, have a very strong sense of feelings, if you like, of people, of the young up-and-coming thrusters. They have more social skills, if you like, more sensitiveness. They're much more empathetic, have a much greater access, if you like, to the young talents. And the young talents actually look for such what we call sort of stars. And they want to find a mentor, somebody who understands me, however much of a nerd I may be. Who is it who gets what I'm about, who has a feeling for what I want to do? And that is something which I certainly found particularly interesting because it's so different. On the other hand, we also see that these transformation drivers, if I may put it in a simple way, they don't really care much about hierarchies. They have a vision, they have ideas, and they live for that idea or that vision. And then they try to find people who will help them in that vision. And they find people who are going with them in every stage of the hierarchy. They don't care about hierarchy or about red tape. They just move all that aside. They just want to make transparent what their vision is, make it something people can live, and that's what they're all about. There's one criterion I'd like to go into greater depth on, which you indicated, being socially adept, leadership skill, that sort of thing. Well, you think, well, the nerd or the techie probably drives that sort of thing, but it probably isn't, or is it? Well, without trying to evade your question, I would actually go about it another way. I think in the future we will have different career profiles and different management careers too. Even today we see you have experts, and experts, that would be your techie, your nerd. And these experts would tend to be very much content-focused or subject-focused and want to have a debate on a specific subject. But that's not somebody who can be a next-generation CEO. He'll always be a specialist, or she. And apart from that, you will have a manager career, and this managerial career will have just that sort of leadership, socially adaptive profile that we need in order to get specialist knowledge into the organization and turn it into a strategy. I think the two will develop in parallel. And I think this indicates something else, that this so-called new generation, quote unquote, and the millennials and the generation Y, Z, whatever, with all the letters, we'll end up with an A soon again. These are all people that don't care about status. They don't care about whether you have a car or not. I mean, if you ask people, they don't even interview people. They don't even ask about cars anymore. They ask about car sharing, about railway usage. I mean, there are suddenly other things that are considered to be important. And that importance makes clear that people want to have a job that has an impact. They want to change something. They want to shape something. And that is something which one of these digital transformation leaders will recognize. They recognize it, they will feel it, and help that along. Digital transformation leader, that's the term you've introduced here. That is the digital quotient, as you call it. Before that, we knew the IQ and emotional intelligence, EQ, and now we have the DQ as well. So IQ, EQ, and DQ, and the DQ for this particular field. Ms. Stegmann, I wanted to ask you, entrepreneurs, can they identify people who will have a high DQ? Are they easy to find, or do you need help? What do we need to do to improve things? Well, obviously, as a company, I will say companies will never see that themselves. They need us, and we help them. But I believe when you look at these 5 categories that we indicated just now, innovation, disruption that they can cope with, being socially adaptive, showing leadership skills, really following through on objectives. And if you take all this as making up a DQ, a digital quotient, and that's ultimately what we did do, well, all this means is that a company, i.e. whoever runs a company, these people will then have to know that these are all skills or traits they need in their organization. We think it's very important that the CEO understands that, because if the CEO doesn't understand that he or she will need somebody who can provide a new stimulus for the whole organization, that is necessary. Now, how can you recognize the DQ? Well, one way of doing it is by, first of all, looking at existing talents. In other words, selecting among your staff those people who have these traits, using the criteria for assessing your staff. That's what we did with our psychometric surveys, because that will help you have the right composition of teams in the future. I also believe, though, that talent management can help, and we should also start looking at that when recruiting new staff. And the 25-plus generation is where we need to find that much more than with the 40-plus generation. So identifying such people early on, young people, I think it'll be the same for you at university, won't it? I mean, you will know very quickly just how curious people are, how much they want to know, how they want to shape things. And you have to sort of bundle that and make sure that their energy is directed in the right channels. Absolutely right. Ms. Stegmann, there is another question I wanted to ask you. This is, of course, the travel industry, and we are convinced that other industries are maybe a little ahead of us regarding digital transformation, so we can learn from them. We always think it's a good idea to look beyond the confines of your own industry, and maybe in other sectors people have done a few steps forward, which we still have to do. And there is another digital transformation maybe as well. I wanted to ask you, because you're looking at all sectors of industry, you don't just focus on travel, you see IT and consumer goods and what have you. What is it that we can learn from other industries? And which other industries are driving this process already, where they try to identify and recruit such digital transformation leaders? And which industries do it more successfully than we do? You are right. There are more consumer proximity-based businesses where the consumer is the focus of everything. And these are then often companies that understand that it's not the business case that is so important, but the user case, if I can call it that, and who've made that the be-all and end-all of what they're doing. And such companies I would consider to be pioneers of transformation. Some people have gone through a painful process to get there, especially in the music and entertainment industries. Although in the music business in particular, people have managed to sort of adapt and change in such a way that they can swim with a new flow with the Apples and the SoundClouds and Spotifys and what have you. And now they're beginning to realize that this sort of multi-channel ability that they need to have is something which now gives them more interaction with the consumers. Again, the automotive industry I mentioned earlier, I think in the automotive industry there's still quite a lot they need to do. But if we're looking at Starbucks, or let's take a Burberry, which is a much quoted example, although ultimately it's a company that has really gone through all the stages, because they went there and said, right, my consumer loves lifestyle, iPhone, Apple, all these products that Apple has to offer. These are all lifestyle products. And I want to be in that flow if I want to move on. So these companies look what people like, and then they have stores where they have all these huge umbrellas, if you like. And during a show, which is going on live in the store, I can make my new order and go or get to all the new products, which I can then order before anybody else can order it, because I get the first chance at them. A simple example, Starbucks, for example, started very early on to say, right, we've got to make sure that all our cafes have to have Wi-Fi that is the consumer-first idea. And insights which are gleaned because of all the things that we're now calling big data, which we get through analytics, and they want to use that and exploit it in the fullest possible way. That's also a big issue for the travel sector, and you have to be quite consistent in going through all the stages. There is one other aspect I wanted to address. You've almost given me the assist here. Startups, that's the buzzword. You might hypothesize that these are companies that tend to attract these sort of creative destroyers in an almost magical way and give them a way to sort of do all they want and have self-realization, if you like. Is it then big companies can't do well enough? Yes and no. I think the university leavers aren't necessarily, and I mean, please bear with me here, go to Allianz or Siemens or other of the really big name companies. I think the interest in rocket internet would be much more. Or just look at corporate consultants, look at banks. They don't find sufficient talent these days. So why is it that young people are so interested in startups? Because they don't have hierarchies. They can really make something happen. Because they allow people to make mistakes, which in big companies is not permissible. Yeah, full stop. Of course, it's a bit of a tightrope that companies have to walk. One of the theses put forward is that these creative destroyers that we all need so urgently sometimes are not actually wanted by companies. Or, you have to be, to some extent, adapted to make a career happen in the company, but you can't do it too much if you want to be a disruptive element. So is it true that companies don't want such people, that they're sort of deselected if they're too creative or too destructive, too creatively destructive? I believe that it's going to get critical wherever the CEO and the top management isn't really behind these new ideas. That's always the indispensable prerequisite for any type of transformation. You need to have a CEO who recognizes you need a different culture of mistakes, trust. Hierarchies need to be dissolved, and all these little add-ons that work, which are much more innovative than all the big business of the company, these need to be allowed room to maneuver. And if you don't give that freedom, then all the creative, destructive force that you talk about won't have a proper impact because the old conflicts are still there. It has a lot to do with hanging on to power, having a comfort zone, also with fear, and that very fear has to be taken away. Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've almost exceeded our time frame. I think that's been an excellent final word. So I've got one last question. What is it that CEOs need to do to make sure that these sort of creative destroyers can act creatively within their companies? And you've given the answer. You said they need room for maneuver. They need to have space. Yes, empowerment for them. That's necessary. Also, we all need to ask ourselves, can I really want the transformation that we're all facing? Do I want to see it? Am I the right person to drive it? Most CEOs will say yes, but maybe secretly they'll say, well, I'm actually not the right person. And then they should have the strength, or maybe also the honesty to say, since I'm not the right person, I get somebody who can do it with me. Excellent. That was a brilliant way of ending. There is nothing I could possibly add to that. Ms. Stegmann, thank you very much indeed for being our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to thank you. The next session will start on time. Thank you very much for your attention.